My special interest has always been supporting parents with neurodivergent children just because it's such a niche that is so vulnerable but also so overlooked.
As parents, we get a lot of unsolicited advice regardless, especially if you're a first time parent, but just you get a lot of advice. But let alone a parent who has a child who may have behaviors that are not neurotypical.
Neurodiversity, just like the term, like we think of biodiversity, right? We think of a forest, think of trees, we think of animals, we think of grass, moss, all of these different elements that exist in order to create that biodiversity in that forest.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to yet another podcast episode with the Tarbiyah Project. Today we are extremely excited to have a wonderful guest with us where we'll be talking about respectful parenting with neurodivergent children. We have our expert Sana Tanvir Malik. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, Sarah.
Wa alaikum salam. I am honored to call Sana a friend as well. So a lot of these conversations we've had in the background on coffee shops over adani chai. But today it's nice to actually formalize this. And the goal of today's podcast episode would be that Sana receives a lot of one-on-one consultations. She also does the flagship program by the Parent Empowerment Project called the Anoke Parents. And she works with parents of children with neurodivergence or parents who might themselves have neurodivergence. We were talking about autism or ADHD, and we'll talk a little bit more about definitions. But I think the idea here is to make a podcast available and accessible to everyone who may not have the means or accessibility to such a consultation, and then we can answer all of those basic questions here, inshallah.
Yeah. Sounds good, inshallah. Bismillah.
Bismillah. So let's start with let's start with a little bit. If someone has not heard about you, if someone doesn't know who Sana is and how, why they should be listening to you, what makes you credible for this topic, give them a little bit more background into what has led you to this point and, what your credibility.
So I've been working as a parent coach for the past 5-6 years now, I think. And my special interest has always been supporting parents with neurodivergent children just because it's such a niche that is so vulnerable, but also so overlooked that it's been really hard to actually find people who are not just supportive, but also knowledgeable enough to guide your children to being their best selves. So that has always been an interest of mine. So I've been working on that for the past several years. I also do have some lived experience as an ADHD person, diagnosed late as an adult, as many women are prone to. So having that experience, having that background, just being very interested in this, just recognizing that children themselves in general are such a vulnerable population, and add stigma and labels and so much misinformation about neurodivergence, and we are ripe for trauma really for those children and parents of those children. So that's just been very important to me as a parent and as a parent coach to be able to offer some kind of support and help to those parents. I'm also a graduate student for mental health counseling. So again, super fun, super interesting, but really goes up my arena. That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. Let's take one step back just for someone who really is stumbling upon this and doesn't even know what a parent coach is. So say, for example, they're struggling with their parenting, or they're struggling and they might, suspect their child to have maybe, some signs of neurodivergence, but they don't really know who to go to, and they don't really know what a parent coach could provide for them. So give a little brief introduction to what a parent coach is.
Yeah, that's a very valid question. I think parent coaching is something that has really boomed as a field in these last few years, but it's still very much restricted to the online arena. So a person who's not very busy on social media might not recognize that this is an area where they can have access and support.
Yeah.
So a parent coach then would be basically somebody who hopefully has some sort of certification
Yes.
and background and training and knowledge about child development, about basic counseling skills in terms of like how to be there for somebody and hold space for somebody without like falling into like giving too much advice or making them feel ashamed of how they've been doing things or blaming them or because we can get that from people around us, right? We can always like count on people around us to make us feel bad about ourselves as parents, as a people, for having children who might struggle. So so we don't need a coach for that, right? So a parent coach should ideally be somebody who's able to hold space for you, who's able to understand where you're coming from, recognize that like really I think it's vital to have like a trauma-informed approach, recognizing what of the parent's own baggage and trauma might be coming in to interfere with their relationship with their child. And of course, like having basic knowledge of child development, about what's age appropriate for certain ages, because again, like sometimes we just have way too many expectations from our children that are just not age appropriate. It's just not how their brains are designed and how they're growing and how immature they are. So like brain wise. So a parent coach should ideally be doing all of that, should have that kind of basic knowledge and expertise, and then be able to support parents who are struggling with anything, with kids of any age really, but like, you know, whether it's an infant who is struggling to sleep and the parent is losing their mind, or it's a toddler and the famous like terrible twos
that last till terrible fours,
or later, like, you know, like we get to the preteen angst and the teenager like shutdown, like what do I do, like how do I connect with my child in any of these stages? And if we haven't had that model for us before, it's very hard to navigate all of these stages with respect and with understanding. So that is what ideally a parent coach should be able to guide you to.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because as parents, we get a lot of unsolicited advice regardless, especially if you're a first-time parent, but just you get a lot of advice. But let alone a parent who has a child who may have behaviors that are not neurotypical, and then so the parent is confused, the husband and wife are confused, and then they're getting all of this advice from people who don't really know what they're talking about. It comes from a place of love and maybe care, but they don't really know what they're talking about. So you really need that guide who actually does know what they're talking about. They've seen many other parents like you. So yeah, that's really important. Okay, let's go back and do some basics. What is neurodiverse? What is neurodivergent? What is the most what is the correct way of saying these? Because you don't want to be offending people who have these kind of neurodivergent diagnoses.
Absolutely. So in my past life, I was an English literature and creative writing major. So I'm still like very much like a grammar nerd. So it does matter. Like other than the fact that, you know, like sometimes grammar bothers me, but it really does matter because a lot of people tend to see this stuff as their identity. So if we're being very careless with our words, it can be offensive because you're really challenging their like identity. So it's kind of like, I think about it like if somebody comes up to us and say, hey, you're Muslimic, right? And that would really irritate me. I'm like,
or Islamic.
I mean, Islamic is still like, you know, like, okay, I'll give you a pass, but Muslimic, like, so that would like really like, that is all the effort you can put in for me. Like, you know, like that's how much I mean to you that you can't even like know how, like what to even like say, call me. So I think it is important. It does.
It demonstrates ignorance more than anything on your part. So we don't want to be living in a world of us being the ignorant ones when we are around other people.
Right, yeah. And potentially hurting other people
Yes,
too. So
yes.
it's very important. So just going back to the terms like neurodiversity, just like the term, like we think of biodiversity, right? We think of a forest, we think of trees, we think of animals, we think of grass, moss, all of these different elements that exist in order to create that biodiversity in that forest, right? So all of those elements, not one is not more important than the other, one is not more significant than the other. They all have a valid role there to create that beautiful forest, that biodiversity that we're looking at. So neurodiversity is very similar. The idea that there are many different kinds of brains and nervous systems. One is not superior to the other just because somebody is born with a brain and nervous system that fits in easily with the way society has been set up does not mean that they deserve extra privilege than somebody who might have, like, let's say, a wider sensory system and they are processing different information differently than somebody who might be neurotypical and who society has been built for. So that's the idea of neurodiversity, that there are many different kinds of brains and brain functions and nervous systems. Not one is more important than the other. And ultimately, when we talk about neurodiversity, we're thinking about it in terms like in the past several years, especially I think in the last decade or so, we've really we've started incorporating neurodiversity into the social justice movement by adopting what is called the social model of disability. So what that basically means is that, again, back to what we were just saying, that the world has been designed a certain way. Society has set up the world a certain way. And some people, consequently, are more privileged based on that. Just like, we think about like white people, the way like the American society has been set up, it's inherently provides more privilege to white people than it does to like colored people. So that's just the way it is. Like it's, but that's not something we just let go because we're like, oh, this is how it is, deal with it. No. So that is where the social justice piece comes in. Where so when we're thinking about the social model of disability versus the medical model of disability, what we're really saying is that stop like thinking about like neurodivergence as a disease, as something to be cured, as something to be fixed, as something to be molded to fit into a certain category. What we're saying is like, like let's accept it. And then if what is disabling that person, that neurodivergent person, is not the way his brain functions, but the way society has been set up that doesn't allow him to become the best version of himself or be a contributing member of society or be of value to society. So that's what the social model of disability then suggests is, so thinking about it this way, like let's say a child or a person needs a wheelchair, and now they have a good degree, they have a good they have a fantastic knowledge base, and now they're looking for a job. And then they show up the day of the interview to the office where they're going to be interviewing, and there's no ramp to get inside the building. Now, is it that person's fault that they are not able to contribute to society and hold down a job, support their family, just because they weren't able to actually go in for the interview, right? So that if we're thinking about social model of disability for invisible disabilities like autism, ADHD, and whatnot, in the same way, that there are just not enough accommodations and understanding in the world in order to support them and so that they can be the best versions of themselves.
So there's two things I want to shoot off of that. Firstly, I think what you're talking about, privilege, that just like white people have privilege in the American society or in the Western society,
Right.
I think in the world, to be honest.
Really, yeah.
I think the reality is that people with privilege, by the very nature of the fact that you have privilege, don't realize that you have that privilege.
Yeah.
So I think for someone who's listening and realizing that maybe they don't realize that they have the privilege, but to be able to first have that level of awareness that, you know what, I've actually never thought about it from the perspective of someone who is neurodivergent, who maybe gets into a public space and starts getting really, really dysregulated because of all the noise that's in the traffic, or maybe the train passing by that they don't even notice because they have a neurotypical brain.
Right.
But then someone who doesn't have that actually gets really affected by that. So just being more aware of your privilege is really
Mm-hmm.
important.
Yeah.
And then the second thing was, you said something about brain functioning and nervous systems.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we might want to delve a little bit deeper into that, because what you said about people with neurodiversity or neurodivergent actually have a different brain and
Mm-hmm.
nervous system.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that,
Mm-hmm.
because I think we still, as a society as a whole, don't recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
don't realize, we think that it's something that's behavioral that can be changed by us, like,
Mm.
you know, yeah,
Yeah.
just give us a little bit
Yeah.
more basic information around that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, so basically, like what when we're saying somebody is neurodivergent, like the definition would be that their brain diverges from the way a neurotypical brain does. And by that, what we mean is that there could be many things, different things that are going on for that person. It could just be that their sensory system works differently, which
Mm-hmm.
means that uh, baby who is neurodivergent, they are in the cradle and now all the sound, because we know like generally children, babies tend to have very sensitive systems
Mm-hmm.
already, but now we have like a neurodivergent baby in the cradle and now there's a lot of like light,
Yeah.
coming. There's a lot of sounds. There are a lot of people like, like the mom is maybe just trying to hold the child a certain way, and like she's trying her best to like soothe the baby, but the baby's finding that movement very dysregulating. So just because the way it's being touched, or baby's not able to communicate that this onesie feels really horrible right now, I don't like the way it
Mm.
feels, or my diaper is wet and I hate that feeling on my body.
Mm.
So again, like, a lot of children can like struggle with those kinds of things, but now we're talking like really amplifying that, because again, like the sensory system is very vulnerable, very sensitive. So there, that person is feeling everything just a lot more. So
Mm-hmm.
thinking about that child in a classroom, uh, like you said, like there are all these kids in the classroom, and then suddenly you hear a train like whooshing by, zooming by, and now all the children like hear it and like immediately, like, their body doesn't react to it. But there's one child who has a very sensitive nervous system, and now their body is like hearing this really loud sound. It's dysregulating, it's scary, and now because it's scary, their body goes into fight and flight response.
Mm-hmm.
So they go into the stress response as if they're responding to a threat in their environment. And now that child might start like cuffing their ears and yelling or hiding under the table. And the teacher will think, and they're like, oh, behaviors,
Mm. Mm.
disruptive behaviors in the
Mm.
classroom,
Mm.
right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about having a different nervous system, having a different brain. It could also be about like how the child processes information. So maybe, and how fast or slow the brain is processing that
Mm-hmm.
information. So I have something also called the auditory processing disorder, which means that if there are too many sounds in my environment, I get really dysregulated because it's hard for me to process all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard for me to figure out like which one am I supposed to be listening to.
Mm-hmm.
So that tends to like really dysregulate me. But also after a certain point, I can't understand what somebody is saying. Like I very specific, before I got this diagnosis, I remember giving this example to my doctor. I told her that I was visiting my brother, and so they had like television on. They always have television on, like really loudly in
Mm-hmm.
their house. And then like we had like, so I'm here, there are like a bunch of kids in the middle, and then my sister-in-law is like all the way on the other side of the room, and she's saying something to me, and she keeps talking to me, and I was like, I hear that you're talking to me, but I cannot understand what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah.
And I remember like really like, oh, this doesn't seem like typical. What is happening here?
Yeah.
So like it really like brought attention to the fact that like something auditory is happening for me, that I can hear you, but I don't understand you. So
Mm.
that can be something again that neurodivergent people experience, that maybe they're like they can hear you, but like their brain is taking their time processing what's
Right.
happening.
Right.
So that child can come across as very annoying because like, you'll say, hey, go like change your clothes, and the child's either is not like acts like they're not listening, or they'll say what, and he's like, go change your clothes. What?
Mm.
And then 2 minutes later, they're like, oh, you said change your clothes. And you're like, so you were listening, but you just wanted to like piss me off, you know? So, but understanding that maybe their brain was just taking its time to actually process that information.
So it just takes, so it's not like they weren't listening to you. It took them a little bit longer for it to get to that part in their brain where it registered as that command. Okay.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about neurodivergence, that their brains work differently, their sensory systems work differently, how they interact with the world can look very different. So again, we're thinking autism, ADHD, we're thinking about like regulation looks different for them. Sometimes they need more support in regulation, be it like regulation of again like sensory stimuli or emotional regulation. So a lot of that like you know, it just looks very different.
You said ADHD and autism. Is there anything else that comes under neurodivergence that, you know, we should know of?
There are several things. It's a pretty wide umbrella at this point. There's dyslexia, there's dyscalculia, which is like math related stuff. There's also like some people consider like bipolar as neurodivergent.
Bipolar
OCD,
disorder.
Bipolar disorder, OCD, like obsessive compulsive disorder, falls under that. Interestingly, which I really personally, I think I really like, that resonates with me. I think it makes a lot of sense. Is complex PTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, is now being classified in some places. I don't think it's official yet, but in some places it's being classified as neurodivergence, which to me makes a lot of sense because when you experience complex trauma, your brain function changes, your brain structure changes. So there's a lot that's happening, and which is why sometimes it's so hard to distinguish trauma and ADHD because the symptoms look so similar. So going back to the idea of like me being a grammar Nazi, it's very important for me to mention the difference between neurodiverse and neurodivergent because I've cringed, I'll admit. I've seen some reels by you know, people online, like perhaps like experts or whatever. They'll say, oh, this child is neurodiverse, and I'm like, no, a child cannot be neurodiverse because neurodiversity, like when we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about a group. We're saying, so let's say you, me, and three other people in this room, and I have ADHD, somebody is autistic, you're neurotypical. Our group is neurodiverse. That means we have a diversity of neurotypes in this room right now. So a person cannot be neurodiverse. So the term for a person would be neurodivergent, which would be that this person's brain or nervous system tends to diverge from what is considered neurotypical.
I also wanted to just point out here that because you had mentioned, and I think there's enough research, we're not going to go into that for this podcast, but maybe we can link a few articles, you know, with the description that neurodivergence is a brain, it's the way your brain is being designed, and is, as Muslims, you know, we have to accept that that design comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the creator who's created everything in this world. So you know, can you talk a little bit, because you talk to parents, I mean, maybe you can share a little bit of, keeping it anonymous, but you know, some of the things that these parents have heard, maybe some of the things you've heard, that come from such a place of ignorance, but it's so hurtful.
It is.
And the thing is, this is not just the illiterate people that are saying this. This is people who are, you know, maybe in, you know, living in America or UK and still saying these things, that isko theek karo, iska kya treatment hai, things like that, right? So just bringing that dini perspective to that, you know, this is, if your child does have something where it is autism or ADHD or any of those, as difficult as that may be initially, to accept that this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also, can you talk a little bit also about, does the parent have any fault or anything to do with any role to play in their child being diagnosed with that?
Thank you for asking that question, because I really do think it's important for us to recognize as Muslims that Allah has said in the Quran, right, that our children, our families are a trial for us. And that doesn't mean it's a negative thing. That just means that this world is designed to be a test for us, right? So it's not like a trial in the negative sense where they're like a punishment for you. We don't say, oh, my children are a punishment for me, subhanAllah. But we do, like, it is a trial because they test us in every way possible. right? Our emotional like regulation, our resilience, our functioning, our mental health, our physical health. They challenge us in
Everything.
every way possible. And that's part of the design, right? That's part of being human. That's part of being uh, someone who was created for Jannah but is on this earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is just the part of who we're supposed to be. So recognizing that if Allah has created your child as neurodivergent, it's not a punishment. It's not a trial in the sense that it's something bad that
Mm-hmm.
Allah wanted you to experience. It really is any trial that we go through as Muslims. We believe that Allah is telling us that with every hardship there is ease, and not just one ease. There are two eases as per the of the surah, right? So what we're saying is that it is a trial that you will get tested, but it's not that Allah is punishing you or Allah wants you to fail or there's something uh, like hard that he's intentionally trying to do for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important to recognize that first and foremost that your child is not a punishment, your child is not designed to make you fail. It's a test, and the hope is always growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
The hope is always that you grow in self-awareness, you grow in spirituality, you grow in your connection with Allah, right?
Yeah.
That's the point of any test,
Yeah.
really, right? Be it your children or be it anything, that we go through in our lives. So that's first and foremost. The second thing is recognizing that Allah has created all of us perfectly imperfect.
Mm.
The design was imperfection, and that has been perfectly done,
Mm.
right? So be it a neurodivergent child or a neurotypical child, we've all been created perfectly imperfect. So that is something for us to remember. Some people are born with extra challenges. It doesn't just have to be like an invisible disability, but it can be like, a child who needs glasses, a child who needs braces, a child who needs like a wheelchair or whatever, right? So there's always something, a child who has medical concerns. So that's first and foremost, that we want to recognize that your child is never a punishment, which unfortunately people will say to parents of neurodivergent children. People will say this to like the parent of an autistic child or a parent of uh, a child with cerebral palsy or
Yeah.
whatever, like
Yeah.
there's just so much ignorance in our society, unfortunately, that they'll say, what did she do that
Yeah.
she was given this child?
Yeah.
What was her past like?
Yeah.
Like there people will say, oh, remember how she used to like sneak out with boys and that's why Allah did this to her. Astaghfirullah. Like, you're assuming that you know what Allah has planned,
Mm.
or that you can speak for Allah for some reason,
Mm.
like subhanallah, that is like that's major. Like
Yeah.
you are pretending that you can speak for Allah. And secondly, assuming ill intent from Allah,
Yeah.
assuming ill intent about another person,
Yeah.
who you have no idea what their personal relationship is like with Allah,
Yeah.
right? So all of this stuff, or they'll say that this child is, like there's so many things I've heard. Like it really like boils my blood, really. But a lot of it tends to align with like he's a punishment for you. You must have done something to deserve this, or did you listen to too much music while you were pregnant? Maybe that's why this happened to you, or
Or maybe it won't be as like what I've heard is what did you do during your pregnancy? Like, so it's like it's again bringing the
blame
the
to the mother.
onus, yeah, on and the
Yes.
ownership on the person who was carrying, and it's just like that comes from a place of ignorance. And I know for women who are going through that, it is so incredibly heavy and hard. And just to recognize that first and foremost, you can't change what other people's opinions are, but you can stop wearing that onus on you, remembering that this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not for yours to carry.
Right. Yeah.
I had one like years ago, again in my past life, when I was working with children with challenges back in New Jersey. There was one family I was working with, Pakistani family, who had decided to move back to Pakistan. Their child was 11 years old and had severe autism, and I think they went there so because the help was more easily, they could like get paid help and all of those things. they were around family, and came back within a year
Yeah.
because they got to hear things like, um, "Iska to kuch nahi hoga."
Yeah.
इसका तो लाइफ में कुछ नहीं बनेगा, you will be stuck with him, they, and just those kind of things. Again, if you are that person who is saying that, just be very mindful that you are going to be accountable for the words that you speak on the day of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So just be very mindful of what comes out of your mouth,
Yeah, yeah. And if you can't help, don't
Stay
harm.
quiet. Just
Yeah.
quiet. Stay quiet.
Yeah, yeah. And again, like, ignorance on the part of the person who's saying this, because A, you don't know what the future holds for anybody, and B, it is absolutely a myth that an autistic person is doomed,
Yeah.
right? There are very, very successful autistic people in the world. I don't like him for a second, but we have Elon Musk.
Yeah.
One of the richest men in the world. So, but yeah, talking
Yeah.
about success.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have him. People say Bill Gates. People say Einstein.
Richard Branson has
Who?
Richard Branson, the businessman who owns the
Oh,
Virginia
yeah.
Airlines.
So many artists like have ADHD.
Yeah.
They're like, so it's really it really depends more on the kind of support a person
Yeah.
gets than and like accommodations and understanding and compassion and celebration of who they are.
Mhm.
That determines, and that goes for any child really.
Mm.
Which is why when I talk about like respectful parenting for neurodivergent children, people often say, but shouldn't we treat them differently? Shouldn't it be more behavioral? Shouldn't be like shouldn't we be focused more on changing XYZ?
Yeah.
And it really goes back to the very basic principle of respectful parenting, which is accept your child for who he is.
Yeah.
Once that acceptance piece comes in, compassion will follow.
Yeah.
When compassion follows, then understanding and accommodation follows.
Mhm.
So whether it's a neurotypical child or a neurodivergent child, and they are having their own struggles, ultimately, as respectful parents, we try to accommodate them, we try to understand them, we try to support them, we try to guide them, coach them.
Mhm.
Whatever it is that they need, we try to meet their needs.
Mhm.
So whether it's a neurodivergent child who has perhaps more needs than a neurotypical child, maybe we provide them more sensory needs. We need to meet more sensory needs. Maybe we accommodate them more and differently in schools and in education settings. So ultimately recognizing that the principle will always remain the same, which is connection, understanding, compassion, and meeting a child's needs.
Yeah.
Because meeting a child's needs leads to growth
Mm.
and leads to connection and leads to self-actualization at the end of the day.
Yeah. What I'm also hearing you, Sana, say is that yes, the societal change will come, and the schools will change, and the social system, inshallah, inshallah, we see some strides being made in that part. But I think it starts from home. It starts from the parents.
100%.
So if the parents can be the biggest advocates for their child, whether neurotypical or neurodivergent, that is what you are also accountable for, and that's what you can have the most control over.
Absolutely.
So focus on that rather than
Right.
saying, ye school acha nahi hai, or the society doesn't accept my child. Do you accept your child?
Right.
Do you love your child the way that they are?
Yeah. And I do want to say one thing, that acceptance will only come after you allow for a bit of grief. So because the world is not designed for neurodivergence, like neurodivergent people, you as a parent can see that a child is going to struggle more than perhaps their peers, or you will see that people will treat your child differently, or there will be more stigma attached to anything the child does. People will see behavior for a neurodivergent child versus, oh, all kids do that for a neurotypical child, right? So definitely there is some grief. And then there's a grief of how you expected your life to be, and suddenly things have shifted.
Yeah.
So like we always say this in the respectful parenting field, that all feelings are valid, be it a child's feelings or be it a parent's feelings. So really, like, sitting with your grief, sitting with your feelings, sitting with how your life might be turning out differently, but like leaning onto Allah and leaning on to the idea that that's his plan and his plan is always better than ours. So again, like making sure we're not gaslighting ourselves, but really accepting our feelings, sitting with our feelings. And once we're able to do that is when we can get to that acceptance and advocacy stage for our children, where we can then accept them for who they are, and then we work on advocating for them to make the world a better place for them. Because ultimately the goal in parenting a neurodivergent child is not to change the child, but to, or cure the child or fix the child, but to really accommodate the child and support the child and meet the child where they are. So we're moving from fixing to supporting.
That is so beautiful. I think that's where a lot of toxic positivity comes as well for the person themselves, where they think if I am, especially as a Muslim, like if I'm grieving that my child just received a diagnosis for autism or ADHD or any other, anything else,
Really?
it's like if I'm grieving, then I'm not being grateful or I'm not accepting my child. And I think that's really important to understand that there is a process to this,
Right.
and that there is a sequence to this, so that grieving part is very much part of the process.
Yeah.
And to allow yourself to process that, and you might be okay with processing that yourself or with your spouse, or you might need some sort of professional help to process that grief before you
100%.
go on to acceptance and advocacy.
100%.
Let's talk a little bit about we've talked a little bit about, for the parents' perspective. Let's talk a little bit about the early signs. So, a parent has just had a baby, how early do the signs appear? And, give us a little bit of an insight into, because this is a spectrum, not every child is going to have the same sort of symptoms or the signs.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Educate us a little bit more about that. What can people be on the lookout for? How early do they start?
Yeah. So, again, we have to first establish that this is a neurological state, which means this is something a child is born with. A lot of people, there's a lot of misinformation, especially about autism, I think, specifically, which is that, it's vaccine related, or it's environment, toxins in our food, whatever. So it, from everything that we know so far about neurodivergence, it is completely biological as far as we know. It is genetic. A lot of people who tend to get diagnosed will find out later that their parents are getting diagnosed too, and they're like, oh, I never thought it was out of the ordinary, because I've done the same thing my entire life. So the parent, sometimes they won't even think of getting a diagnosis because they're like, yeah, that's my childhood. So there is definitely a genetic component there for sure. So yes, so the child is born with this. Sometimes a child is being accommodated well enough that you might not see any symptoms till maybe much later, when the child really starts struggling more, and then you see more typical symptoms of whatever their condition or state is. So so there's that. Autism specifically can be diagnosed as early as 18 months at this point. Again, pros and cons, the pro would definitely be that you can get early intervention, which can be pretty helpful, especially.
You're talking about an official diagnosis,
I'm
going
talking
to a
about
professional.
yes,
okay.
Getting a professional.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.